Here's an easy way for you to help us contend for truth in an age of anti-truth. Subscribe to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Just type Issues Etc. in the YouTube search engine and click subscribe. For Apple and Spotify, type Issues Etc. in the search engine, hit follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Help us inform other podcast listeners by subscribing to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
The emperor has no clothes on. He's buck naked. That child had to speak the truth no matter how it would make the king feel. And we have to do that today. We have to be very conscientious objectors to the madness that is gender ideology.
And most people default into this idea of feminism is this idea that men are contemptible, which is, of course, the idea behind the smashing the patriarchy, and women need to be just like them and have the same equality.
The Crusades were a very belated response to many centuries of Muslim conquests, in which 2/3 of the old Christian world had already fallen to Muslim conquest.
And our faith is strong, not because of the fervor of its affection, but because of the object to which it clings, Christ. And there is no stronger faith than a really timid grasping to the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Families sailing on their family vacation on lakes in Minnesota love Issues Etc.
We love Issues Etc. Woo!
By numerical standards, Islam has been a success. By geographical standards, it's been a success. It is spread worldwide. By political standards, well, it does occupy much of the politics on every continent of the globe. Is it possible with all this success, numerical, political, geographical, that Islam is still a failure? Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc. live on this Monday afternoon, June the 15th. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in. We're going to talk about the failures and the excuses of Islam with Dr. Robert Spencer. He's director of Jihad Watch. Then we'll respond to listener email and the Issues Etc. comment line. We'll spend some time with Katie Faust discussing the declining support for same-sex marriage in the GOP. Robert Spencer is director of Jihad Watch. He's author of numerous books on Islam, including his latest, The Tragedy of Islam. Robert, welcome back.
Always good to talk to you, Todd. Thank you.
So due to bad weather, you weren't able to speak at last week's Issues Etc. Making the Case conference. I wanted to let you know that you were deeply missed.
Well, thank you. I was very sorry, very deeply disappointed not to be able to be there, because I've been looking forward to it, especially in light of the fact that the Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations and some leftists were angry about my appearance. It was a shame that I was kind of flabbergasted, really, when they said in the airport, not only is this flight canceled, but all flights for the weekend to Chicago are canceled everywhere in this area. And so I thought, well, there's just no way I can be there. And I was very sorry to hear it.
Let's begin by having you respond to two criticisms for us having you as a conference speaker. The first one was that you put the worst construction on Islam. People would say my Muslim friends and neighbors don't espouse what you state about Islam.
This comes from a very common confusion that people often make nowadays between the individual believer and Islam. As a Christian, I would like to be able to say all Christians love their enemies and turn the other cheek. But you and I both know that's not the case. But that does not mean that the Lord didn't say it. And it's the same thing in Islam. There are plenty of Muslims who are nice guys. That is absolutely undeniable, and I've never denied it. There are also violent teachings of Islam in the Qur'an, the holy book, that direct believers to wage war against unbelievers and subjugate them under the hegemony of Islamic law. And even when a Muslim is nice, those teachings don't go away. Just like when a Christian doesn't love his enemies, those teachings of Jesus don't go away. And so we have to learn to separate the doctrine of the faith, which is what I talk about, from every Muslim individual who may or may not be carrying out those teachings of the faith.
The second criticism is that you aren't interested in Muslims converting to Christianity. You're really only interested in criticizing Islam. Is that true?
Well, no, it's not in the least true. I've actually written 2 books, one of them called Religion of Peace, Why Christianity Is and Islam Isn't, and the other called Not Peace But a Sword, and they are both designed to treat various aspects of Islam and Christianity to show why Christianity makes more sense of the world, is actually much less violent, doesn't have the violent teachings of Islam. Working toward converts to Christianity is something that has always been a part of my work. I've appeared on numerous videos with Christian apologists and critics of Islam like David Wood, my good friend, and others. It's just that I also have a broader focus in terms of trying to establish a coalition between all the people who are threatened by Islamic Jihad, which is not just Christians, but Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, etc. And so in my work on trying to establish common ground with those people, have not scanted my own Christian faith or the very positive aspects of having Muslims convert to Islam. It's just not the sole focus of my work.
There are serious problems with the Western world. Everyone can see that. Some have said the answer is Islam. How do you respond?
Well, this is something we hear more and more often. And it's interesting to note that Muslims are becoming much more assertive about saying that in the West, much more open about it. I see it on a relatively regular basis when just a few years ago, you never heard Muslim spokesmen say that. And I think that Muslims are growing in numbers and confidence in the United States, and so they feel free to be more open about this than they have in the past. But the fact is that when they talk about Islam being a solution for America as a society, that is something that is capable of being verified. We can look at Islamic societies and see what they're like. Are they economically prosperous? Do they guarantee human rights? Things like that. And we can see that actually, no, Islam does not have a good human rights record or a good economic record. So whether it would be the solution to the very many ills of the Western world seems unlikely when in the Islamic world it's only the accident of having struck oil that has brought any prosperity to the region at all.
Talk about what is now kind of undeniable, and it's a two-pointed truth. The first is that Islam, by its own definitions, seeks global domination. And two, that when Muslims are in a minority in any given location, they generally tend to behave very differently than when they gain the majority.
Yeah, absolutely, Todd. This is very important, that there are several stages in the Qur'an of the teachings on jihad. This causes a great deal of confusion. And the first stage is tolerance, but it's not actually a call for tolerance of non-Muslims. It's a call for tolerance of Muslims. That the early parts of the Qur'an, according to Islamic tradition, were revealed when Muhammad and the Muslims, it was a small group. And so Muhammad is appealing for tolerance of the Muslims, not telling the Muslims to be tolerant. Then when they gain political and military power after the Hijrah to Medina, then you see the tolerance vanish and the warfare against unbelievers preached. And so this is the teaching of the Qur'an. How do we make sense of it? Islamic scholars explain that the passages that come chronologically later in Muhammad's career take precedence over the earlier ones. But that doesn't mean that the earlier ones are just canceled and disappear. Whenever Muslims are a small minority that has no political or military power, then they should behave the way Muhammad did in Mecca, which is to call for tolerance in the face of a superior force. But when the Muslims grow in numbers and power, then they are to start to wage defensive jihad and offensive jihad. And this is what we are facing in the West today, that we heard for decades, particularly after 9/11, that Islam is a religion of peace. And now, when Muslims are growing significantly in numbers and power in the West, I see, like I was just saying, Muslims in America quite frequently talking about when they take over. There was a young Somali, and he made a video a few months ago holding up a picture of Trump. And he said, "My only regret is that this man is very old, and he is not going to live to see our total takeover." A lot of Americans would be completely surprised to learn that any Muslim speaks that way at all. But unfortunately, it's growing more common because it's rooted in imperatives of the Islamic faith. The Qur'an says, fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. So, see, you could be minding your own business as a Lutheran and not bothering anybody, but because your religion is not all for Allah, there could come along a Muslim who thinks that he has a responsibility to fight you. And this is an open-ended declaration of war against unbelievers. Fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. And this is what causes this tremendous amount of conflict that we see. Everywhere that Muslims and non-Muslims live together, the Muslims are creating conflicts with the non-Muslims. I don't see that that's going to be any different in the United States.
And we've seen this rule play out historically. We have seen this tactic, if you will, of first a call for tolerance, and then when numbers are sufficient, the imposition of Islam and Sharia law play out in history again and again and again.
That's right. I have a book that I wrote a few years ago called The History of Jihad that contains exactly that, 1,400 years of jihad. And we see it again and again, just as you say, that when Muslims are a small group without political power, they preach tolerance, and yet that tolerance vanishes once they gain sufficient force. And this is what we're looking at right now in the United States, while people are saying it's terrible and Islamophobic to even suggest that any Muslims might wish to implement the passages of the Qur'an that call for warfare against unbelievers. Yet those passages do exist. I didn't make them up. And there are Muslims who are acting upon them.
Do most Muslims, and here I should say probably in the West, do they know what Islam teaches in this regard?
Well, a lot of them don't, actually. It might surprise people to hear, but just as in Christianity and in Judaism and in every other religion, there are a lot of nominal believers who go along with what they have to do culturally, but they don't really know a whole lot about the faith. And in Islam, that's compounded by the fact that most Muslims today are not Arabs and do not speak Arabic as their native tongue, and yet the Quran is in Arabic, and it's not considered to be really the Quran if it's translated out of Arabic. And you have to pray, when you pray the congregational prayers, you have to pray them in Arabic. And so you have this very anomalous situation where, for example, in Pakistan, which is not a native Arabic-speaking country, not an Arab country, you have young boys in madrasas being taught to memorize the entire Quran, and they do so without knowing actually what it's saying in the slightest degree, because they don't speak Arabic, and translation, understanding is not emphasized. The point is to get it all memorized in Arabic, because the words themselves, the Arabic words, are considered to have a power of their own. And so if you are able to recite the Quran, it's not so important what it means. It's a very different mindset from what we have in the West. And so they can grow up and be devout and observant Muslims without having any real clear or detailed idea of what Islam teaches at all.
Dr. Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch is our guest. We're talking about the failures and excuses of Islam. We'll talk about the ethic of Islam next.
This is Molly Hemingway, encouraging you to listen to my favorite podcast, Issues, Etc. Every day you get in-depth interviews with host Todd Wilkin asking expert guests substantive, thought-provoking questions on all of the important news and issues of our day. The expert guests are in culture, law, ethics, philosophy, theology, and apologetics. Expert guests, expansive topics, always extolling Christ. Issues, etc.
Psalm 144:1. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Those serving in the armed forces want LCMS chaplains. We need courageous pastors to bring the gospel and sacraments to those protecting our nation, along with wise counsel and the peace found only in Christ Jesus. If you are between the age of 26 and 43 and have a heart for ministry in the armed forces, call 314-996-1337 or email lcmschaps@lcms.org.
Are you looking for a confirmation gift for the confirmand in your life? Ad Crucem has a huge selection of lovely gifts to suit any budget. See our jewelry or browse our prayer aids with stunning icons, plaques, crucifixes, and certificates. Our personalized ornaments and boxes are other great ideas. And of course, our theologically sound greeting cards complement the gift perfectly. Visit adcrucem.com. That's ADCRUCEM.com.
Defending the faith, teaching the truth. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues, Etc., and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, "Why do you say very God, a very God?" And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues, Etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Dr. Russell Dawn, president of Concordia University, Chicago.
Indeed, the quest for truth is at the core of a university's purpose. The liberal arts, illuminated by the revealed truths of Scripture, are powerful for equipping students for a life of self-governance. A disciple is one who follows the Master. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? He said that it means to take up one's cross. The cross is thus the symbol of dying for others, of dying to self for the sake of serving others. And a life of service is a life well lived.
Truth, freedom, vocation. Concordia University, Chicago. cuchicago.edu.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. We're talking about the failures and excuses of Islam. Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch, is our guest. He's authored numerous books on Islam, including his latest, The Tragedy of Islam. Robert, you write about the ethic of Islam. What is it?
Well, the ethic of Islam is actually essentially parasitical, and that is a reference to the famous book that some people may have heard of who are listening, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which was a book about how Protestant Christianity, because it teaches the value of work and how God will bless the work of your hands and so on. It's made for prosperous societies because people would work and think that they were being blessed by God, and so they wouldn't hesitate to work. Whereas in Islam, there is really no work ethic. I'm not saying that nobody works. Obviously they do. But it's not considered to be something that Allah blesses in and of itself. It's actually vaguely shameful that a man has to work instead of having slaves or non-Muslims who are paying the jizya, which is the special tax that the Qur'an specifies that the non-Muslims must pay. The ideal society as envisioned in the Qur'an is one in which the non-Muslims are paying for the upkeep of the Muslims through their taxes or through their slave labor. And so the societies thus created by this ethic, they lived off the non-Muslims, paying the tax and working for the Muslims. And I go into this in detail in the book, The Tragedy of Islam, in regard to the Ottoman Empire as well as the Mughal Empire in India. And the upshot is that when those empires had a big population of non-Muslims paying lots of tax, they were powerful. But when the non-Muslims were bled dry and could no longer pay the taxes at the rates that they had before, those empires went into decline. Their entire economies were dependent upon the labor of the non-Muslims. And so in a counterpoint to the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, I have a chapter in the book called The Islamic Ethic and the Spirit of Parasitism. It's all designed to be living off the labor of others rather than inculcating a work ethic in oneself.
And despite Islam's numerical success, you say Islam is a failure. In what sense do you mean that?
I mean that it's not good for human beings or societies. As for societies, it makes them parasites, as I just explained. And as for individuals, because it does contain teachings of violence, teachings of the necessity to wage war, it's bad for human beings as individuals. And I go through quite a few stories in the book of converts to Islam who became terrorists. Now, I think that probably all of us know people who've converted to Christianity, and none of them are terrorists. That's not an accident. It's because Christianity, in its core teachings, does not teach terrorism, does not teach the sanctification of violence, whereas Islam does. And so people who convert to Islam and end up reading the Qur'an with a clean slate and no cultural assumptions or habits, they all too often become terrorists, whereas that is not the case in pretty much any other situation, any other religious tradition. And that indicates, as far as I'm concerned, that Islam's really not good for you. That you end up thinking that evil is good and good is evil, as the prophet Isaiah warned us about. And a lot of Muslims, converts or no, become the embodiment of the Lord Jesus' saying that the time will come when men will kill you and think they're offering service to God.
You talk about that failure breeding jihad. Describe that for us.
Yeah, if you are taught, as Islam teaches, that every believer will prosper, that Allah will bless you in this world as well as the next if you follow him, and then you go out into the world and you don't end up becoming a success in this world, then you're not going to blame Allah, you're going to blame yourself. There's always more that you could do. And so ultimately this leads you to the greatest thing that you can do in Islam, and that is jihad. And Muhammad, in a famous tradition, is asked, tell me a deed that's greater than jihad. And he says, I do not find such a deed. In other words, there's nothing greater than jihad. And so if there's nothing greater than jihad, and you are not getting the results that you thought you were going to get from serving Allah, then you go jihad. And that makes it clear that Allah has to bless you now. He promised you prosperity in this world as well as the next. If you serve him, you've done the greatest thing there is, you should get your reward. And so the failure of Islam to give people the success that is promised leads directly to more jihad activity.
How does the failure of Islam also lead to hatred of Jews?
Well, see, this is the clearest scapegoat. When Islam does not give you prosperity in this world as well as the next, the Quran also says that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. And they're always scheming against the Muslims. They're always causing them trouble, trying to block their plans, trying to prevent them from implementing the teachings of Allah. And so it must be their fault. You see, if you're not prospering, it's got to be that the Jews have done something to keep you from prospering, because the only other alternative is that you're going to blame Allah and say his promise is not true. And obviously, any true believer in Islam is not going to be very eager to do that. And so if it's not Allah, being false in his promises, then it must be the Jews.
Does that come with a suspicion of other outsiders?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the unbelievers are considered to be, as the Qur'an says, the most vile of created beings, as chapter 98, verse 6 says, and like animals. And so they are these vile individuals who are animalistic and dehumanized. Clearly, then, if you're in an environment that includes a lot of non-Muslims, even if they're non-Jews, you're going to have total contempt for them and think that if you are suffering setbacks in this world, it must be their fault.
Often we hear someone say that while they'll concede that Islam today is a stagnating force in civilization, but there was a time in Islam's history when they invented science and mathematics and all sorts of other cultural and social achievements. Is that true?
No, not really. That's another thing that I go through in the book, that it seems as if there's a peculiar tendency on the part of non-Muslims, certain non-Muslims, to make excuses in the face of the failure of Islam and to try to give the impression that Islamic civilization and Judeo-Christian civilization are essentially equivalent, or that Islamic civilization is even much superior. And since they don't have much to show for that in the present world, they go back and build a case from history that is built on fictions and fantasies, including most notably and notoriously the idea of the Islamic Golden Age in Al-Andalus, in medieval Spain, which was supposedly a paradise of multiculturalism. And this is, as I show in the book, a complete historical fantasy. The real Al-Andalus was quite oppressive for non-Muslims and was a center of the Islamic slave trade, with Christians being enslaved and sent all over the Islamic world to serve Muslims. And so the idea that this was some wonderful multiculturalist paradise, well, it's ridiculous on its face.
Robert Spencer is our guest, director of Jihad Watch. We're talking about the failures and excuses of Islam. We'll find out if he's surprised by Western support for Islamic grievances next.
The church's music from the 2nd century.
Shepherd of tender youth, guiding in love and truth.
The 6th century. The 12th century. The 16th century. The 21st century. The best of the church's music from the past 2,000 years. LutheranPublicRadio.org.
Your comprehensive source for information, teaching, and truth. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Lutherans for Life assists for-life Christians in offering the hope and help of the good news of Jesus Christ to women with an untimely pregnancy, women, men, and families suffering under the guilt of an abortion, young people with questions and concerns about sexuality, and the elderly and those with disabilities or terminal illnesses. Learn more about LFL resources and forming a life team or life chapter, or becoming a life advocate by calling 888-364-LIFE. That is 888-364-5433, or by visiting lutheransforlife.org.
For nearly 140 years, the Lutheran Witness has taught the faith, defended it against error, and shown forth the great treasures of the Lutheran Church and biblical doctrine. We're continuing this legacy by publishing issues and articles that help you see the world from a Lutheran perspective and that teach biblical doctrine and show forth the treasures of God's Word. Visit our website to learn more and how to subscribe, witness.lcms.org. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Memoria Press homeschool curriculum equips you with everything you need to give your child a classical Christian education. They want to help you cultivate in your student a love for what is good, true, and beautiful. Their curriculum is easy to use and covers kindergarten to 12th grade. Learn more at memoriapress.com. Save $5 when you enter the coupon code LPR26MP. Memoria Press, saving Western civilization one student at a time.
If you're in a small parish, you know how difficult it can be to find an organist when your musician is sick, has a family emergency, or simply wants a week off to visit the grandkids. Church Music Solutions can help. Our substitute organist service allows you to select your hymns and liturgy to be sent to an iPad that plays your church's organ. The best way to learn more is to log on to churchmusicsolutions.com and request a free demo kit. There are no obligations and there's no sales pitch. Keep singing with Church Music Solutions.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. We're talking about the failures and excuses of Islam. Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch is our guest. Robert, does it surprise you at all that so many Western progressives have adopted the positions of basically Islamic grievance and the idea that Islamophobia is sweeping the West?
Well, the left loves Islam, and there are a variety of reasons for that. One of them is that the left hates Western culture, which is based on Christianity, and it hates Christianity. It hates the United States, hates everything that is Western in its essence, and sees Islam as being non-white, non-Christian, and non-Western, and consequently it must be good, because if there's an original sin among leftists, it's being Western, Christian, and white. And so they see Islam wrongly. They see Islam as the opposite to this, but this is how they do see it. And I say wrongly because, of course, there are white Muslims. This is not really a racial issue in any way, shape, or form, but it's very common to find non-Muslim Western leftists identifying Islam with non-Westernness and non-whiteness. And they... Even among Muslims, I have my good friend Bosch Fawston is an ex-Muslim of Albanian descent, and he's blonde and blue-eyed, and he looks like the Aryan ideal, but he was raised in a Muslim household, and his family is Muslim going back hundreds of years. And there are even Muslims who say to him, "You're not a Muslim, you're never a Muslim, you're lying," because they just can't believe this. But this is a result of the tendency in the West to see the issue of jihad violence as racial, when it's not actually racial in the slightest degree.
To your mind, do many of those jumping on the, for lack of a better word, just call it anti-Islamophobia bandwagon, to your mind, do they have the slightest idea about what Islam does or its long and very sad history?
No, I don't think they do. I think that unfortunately, the people who are all worried about Islamophobia have no idea what Islam really teaches, no idea of the plight of suffering persecuted Christians in Nigeria, Christians in Pakistan, Hindus in Bangladesh, and so on and on and on. They have no idea that the suffering of those people emanates directly from Islamic teaching. And so they just tend to see Islam as this non-Western thing, as I explained, and so they embrace it.
Is that what you mean by fabricated Muslims?
No, fabricated Muslims, that's a chapter of the book, and that actually has to do with the whole cottage industry among Islamic apologists in the West of claiming that all sorts of people who never were Muslims actually converted to Islam. Famous people like Neil Armstrong, the man who walked on the moon, he actually once recounted that he could practically not go outside without Muslims coming up to him and praising Allah and for his conversion to Islam. And he supposedly went onto the moon and he heard the Islamic call to prayer there. And so he converted to Islam when he got back. This is total fiction, but it's sort of a counsel of despair because they don't have accomplished real converts to point to in any great number. You know, you have Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and, well, you can't really name very many others. And so, unfortunately, there is a tendency among many Islamic apologists just to make it up and to claim all these famous Western figures as converts to Islam.
What do you make of the geopolitical phenomenon that we find, and it's very strong in Western Europe, it has its tendrils into the United States as well, to view Islamic immigration, in many cases completely unfettered in any way, as kind of the future of Western Europe?
Well, you know, that's how it was sold to Western Europe to start with. The Western Europeans were told that the populations of Western Europe were not reproducing themselves, were not sustaining themselves in sufficient numbers. And so the idea of mass migration of people who are not Europeans was sold to the Europeans as a means to make up for that shortfall, that they would bring in all these other people who would take the jobs that Europeans were now too old to do or too few in number to do, and so on. Now, this was a cruel trick on the Europeans because, as it turned out, Muslims streamed into Europe as expected, and then they went on welfare. They didn't take jobs at all. And the welfare rolls all over Europe were inflated to a tremendous degree by perfectly able-bodied Muslims who believe, because the Qur'an says that the non-Muslims have to pay them the jizya, they believe that in the lieu of payment of that jizya, if the jizya is not being collected, that the Muslims have a perfect right to live on welfare and even to steal from the non-Muslims, because it is the responsibility of the non-Muslims to pay for their upkeep.
In that vein, what are your observations about the election of several prominent, at least Muslim or Muslim-adjacent politicians, but I'm thinking here in particular about the recent election of the mayor of New York? And oddly, to my way of thinking, you'll need to explain it, Robert, his affinity for what some have called openly Marxist ideas, at least socialist ideas.
Well, see, here again, actually, it all coalesces. That Mamdani is a socialist. He's actually a Marxist. I wrote a book about him last year, Intifada on the Hudson, the selling of Zohran Mamdani, and I show how he is an out-and-out Marxist, believes in the seizure of the means of production and all that. And this has no incompatibility with Islam, because in Islam, it's kind of a socialist system. You know, Margaret Thatcher very famously said, socialism works great until you run out of other people's money. In the Islamic system, the system works great until you run out of the infidels' money. And so the idea of constructing a city on the basis of stealing money from other people or seizing money from other people and confiscating their property and so on, that's entirely Islamic and entirely socialist. The left loves it because they're Marxists. They believe that the government should control the means of production and all of that. And of course, in Islam, it's the same thing. So they love Mamdani not only because he's a Muslim, but because he is a socialist and is implementing these programs.
Robert Spencer is our guest. He's director of Jihad Watch. We're discussing the failures and excuses of Islam. We'll discuss Islam and Israel next. Voting takes place Saturday, June 13th through Tuesday, June 16th for president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. If you're a registered voter for the 2026 LCMS presidential election, please vote to re-elect Issues Etc. regular guest Pastor Matt Harrison for a final 3-year term. If you're not a voter, encourage your pastor and your congregation's lay voter to vote for President Harrison. Official ballots have been mailed to all registered voters. Remember to vote June 13th through the 16th.
We know that you want to build your family on the right foundation from the very start, the foundation of Jesus Christ. Concordia Publishing House offers more than 8,000 products for churches, schools, and homes, dedicated customer service, and an experienced staff to help you focus on what matters most. Click to connect at cph.org. Concordia Publishing House, listening, responding, providing for God's people. Concordia Publishing House, cph.org.
The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod's Life Ministry cares for pregnant women sharing the love of Christ. Listen to Pastor Ed DeWitt with Redeeming Life Outreach Ministries.
One of the first residents we had said to me, "Pastor, why do you do this?" And I said, "Just stick with me through this class, and when we're done, you'll understand completely." Many of the women, as they go through the instruction, when we get to that part about baptism, they're like, "Pastor, I want that for my baby. I want my baby to be adopted into God's family."
God's Mission Here, lcms.org/national mission.
Birds sing, cows moo, thunderstorms wake you from a deep sleep, but for many, they can't hear it. They're deaf, living in a world of total silence. The Epitha Lutheran Mission Society for Deaf Ministry is the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted exclusively to the deaf and hard of hearing. Their mission is to bring the gospel message of Jesus' love and saving grace to those who are deaf. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
Truth-centered mission outreach. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
You may be one of those pastors who need to be refreshed and refueled because of your parish ministry.
Issues, Etc. regular guest, Dr. Charles Gieshin.
Concordia Theological Seminary has a wonderful program, not only in continuing education during the summer, but in a advanced study program called the Doctor of Ministry. And it's a very practical program because it focuses on congregational ministry. It incorporates biblical theology with the ministry of the congregation. It's also very accessible for pastors, and it's also affordable. You can major in pastoral care and leadership, teaching and preaching, or mission and culture. And we pray that pastors will take advantage of this program.
Learn more about the Doctorate of Ministry program at ctsfw.edu or by calling 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Yesterday marked the 251st birthday for the U.S. Army. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod chaplains serve soldiers and their families in all branches of the U.S. military. Learn more at lcms.org/armed forces, LCMS Ministry to the Armed Forces, lcms.org/armed forces. We're talking about the failures and excuses of Islam. Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch and author of numerous books on Islam, including his latest, The Tragedy of Islam, is our guest. Robert, why is the mere existence of the State of Israel an insult to Islam?
That is Islamic land as far as Muslims are concerned. You may notice, Todd, that a lot of the flags of Islamic countries, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and others, they are green. And it's not just that they like the color. They are green because Islam is always in a springtime. It's always growing. It's never in winter. It never contracts. And this is based on the Quranic passage, drive them out from where they drove you out, chapter 2, verse 191. Now, drive them out from where they drove you out. It's a small phrase, but it's large with meaning because it really is all about how if a land belongs to Islam at any point, then the Muslims own it forever. And they have a responsibility before Allah, like we have the Ten Commandments, to take it back from the non-Muslims who took it. And so if the State of Israel is established on land that was once ruled by Islam, then the Muslims have a responsibility before Allah to get it back. And that's why drive them out from where they drove you out is such an important passage that indicates why all of the approaches in regard to Israel are wrong, because they're based on the idea that it's just a land dispute, and if we hit the right compromise, to get the both sides to share the land, then everything will be okay. Well, actually, there isn't any solution that will ever convince many of the Palestinian jihadis to lay down their arms, because they believe they are fighting a conflict that Allah has ordered. And so they're not going to negotiate that away. They're not going to compromise that away. They're not going to split it 50-50 or any other percentage. They're going to keep fighting until all of Israel is destroyed and all of that land is Islamic again.
Is this why, perhaps with a little bit of short history, why Yasser Arafat, when essentially handed a solution, I think it was a two-state solution at Camp David, the Oslo Accords, by President Bill Clinton, and he had, if I'm not mistaken, the Israelis' assent to this thing, Arafat refused?
Yeah, of course he refused, because he had to go back and deal with the jihadis. Even if he would have wanted to accept, which I'm not saying at all, he knew that he would have been killed like Sadat if he had accepted, because whatever they might say about land and so on, the reality is they will never accept Israel, even if it's the size of a postage stamp. Never. They will never allow Israel to exist on any piece of that land. It's Islamic. And so Arafat could not accept that deal because it included Israel's continued existence. And there was no way that was going to be allowed.
How do you explain the official antipathy that many Islamic nations have or harbor against the United States then?
Well, the United States, you see, is the chief competitor to the Islamic vision. The Islamic vision is that all the world will be ruled by Islamic law. And that is what Muslims are supposed to be working toward. The caliphate is the primary agent that should be working toward that, and there is no caliphate today. It was abolished in 1924 by the secular Turkish government. And so, in the first place, the first step is to restore the caliphate. But once that's done, then to conquer and Islamize the world is the imperative. And so, if you are the believer in an expansionist, aggressive, violent ideology that asserts its authority over the whole world, then your primary obstacle to the realization of your goals is this massive superpower that teaches that the government should be, what is it that the Declaration of Independence says? That the government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. That's directly against the Islamic idea that the government derives its just powers from Allah, not from the consent of the governed. And so if you have the United States teaching that, then it's the enemy of Islam. And this is why it is so widely hated.
Does that go hand in hand with Islamic teaching of antipathy toward Christians in particular?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because here again, Christianity is also a competitor to Islam, that you have to Islamize the whole world. And a lot of people say, well, no, I have a religion, and my religion is beautiful and loving and doesn't teach the things that your religion of violence and hatred teaches. And so I'm going to keep my religion, thank you very much. And so Christianity has to be fought against. But also that's rooted in the Qur'an, where you have the idea that Christianity is a false religion that is based on a tampering with the true teachings of Jesus. And so it has to be destroyed and supplanted by Islam.
How do the average inhabitants of Muslim countries deal with what you call the cognitive dissonance? They're told one thing about Islam and its effect on their lives by their teachers and their moms, but every day they kind of live out the consequences of what Islam does to a society and to individuals.
Well, they don't really see a contradiction, because the problem is that if Allah has promised prosperity in this world and you don't have it, it's your fault. It's not Allah's. And you're never going to blame Allah for it. You're never going to see that maybe the promise itself is false. As I explained before, you'll go jihad or you'll blame the Jews, or both. And so you never resolve the real problem, which, or seldom do very many Muslims come to the realization that the problem is that there isn't any ideology, much less Islam, that will guarantee you prosperity in this world. And so the very fact that Islam claims that is an indication that it's false.
I recently had an interview with, really, I think probably the foremost expert on the Christian Crusades, and he pointed out that while the Crusades succeeded or failed to varying degrees, because we're talking about a pretty broad category there, he said what they did do was simply slow the advance of Islam, but they certainly did not stop the advance of Islam, especially if you view it from the 30,000-foot view of the 21st century. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. No doubt about that whatsoever. The Islamic imperative to wage war against and subjugate unbelievers never went away. It never has gone away. It's never been reformed or rejected by any Islamic sect. And so it was there before the Crusades, and it's still there. The Crusades, however, did prevent the continent of Europe from being overwhelmed by Muslims. And so that's a very major and important thing that the Crusades did succeed in doing. The Crusades went on, there were Crusader territories in the Middle East from 1099 to 1291. So that's just under 200 years. And in that 200-year period, you don't have Islamic incursions into Europe. When you had very serious Islamic incursions into Europe, both before 1099 and after 1291. And so it's I actually argued in my book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, that the Crusades prevented the conquest and Islamization of Europe.
He also pointed out that the Crusades in some way bought time with the age of colonization, where Western Europe became prosperous beyond its wildest dreams, and in many ways that also thwarted the designs of Islam upon Europe.
Yeah, obviously the jihad was harder to pursue against a more formidable foe. And also then it comes into my thesis in The Tragedy of Islam, that the Islamic empires were based on the jizya, the tax that non-Muslims pay. And consequently, when the non-Muslim populations were exhausted, the jizya could no longer be paid at the same rates, and the Islamic empires went into decline. And that coincided with the growth and the strengthening of Christian Europe. So both of those things made it such that the jihad could no longer be pursued against Europe.
How do you respond to the assertion that people who criticize Islam and its teaching and practices are Islamophobic?
Well, Islamophobia in the first place is a made-up thing. You never heard about it 30 years ago, and there's a reason for that. It was coined after that in order to intimidate people into thinking that there's something wrong with opposing jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women. Actually, anybody who cares about human rights and the dignity of each human person before God should oppose jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women. And to call that by some word that suggests it's a pathology, it's just propaganda. It doesn't have any actual intellectual value. It's just name-calling. But it works, and this is why they do it. It works wonderfully in the sense that it scares people. And they think, especially politicians, they think if I get branded an Islamophobe, then the papers will come after me, and the Council on American Islamic Relations will come after me, and my career will be ruined. And so they go along.
Robert Spencer is director of Jihad Watch. He's author of numerous books on Islam, including his latest, The Tragedy of Islam. You can purchase this new book on the podcast page for this episode. at issuesetc.org. Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
We will be going through listener email, the Issues Etc. comment line on the other side of the break. So Islam is a false religion based on lies and a bad worldview based on lies. And it turns out that a false religion and a bad worldview actually harms people, not only eternally, but here in time as well. I'm Todd Wilkin. Stay with us.
Listen weekday afternoons to Pastor Todd Wilkin and guests on Issues Etc. Issues Etc. is a listener-supported program. Your financial support is vital for the continuation and expansion of this worldwide outreach. Our mailing address, Issues Etc., P.O. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. You can also donate at our website, issuesetc.org. Issues Etc. is a production of LPR, Lutheran Public Radio.
Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Collinsville, Illinois is happy to support the Christ-centered, cross-focused ministry of Issues Etc. Join us for worship, Bible classes, youth ministry, and other opportunities to grow in Christ. We have a Christian day school for children in preschool to 8th grade. We are located at 1300 Beltline Road. Call us at 618-344-3151 or visit www.goodshepherdcollinsville.org.
Oh Lord, open my lips.
Listen to chapel services live, weekday mornings from Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Morning Chapel from Kramer Chapel. Live weekday mornings at 9 Central, 10 Eastern, 8 Mountain, and 7 Pacific at issuesetc.org.